Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep
Deep.
into a part of your brain you might not even know you have,
Oh, yeah.
basal ganglia.
That's right.
We're using Dr. Rasha Eldeeb's physiology notes as our guide, and trust me, this is going to be way more interesting than it sounds.
Well, that's because the basal ganglia are involved in pretty much everything you do.
Everything.
Yeah, from the smooth movements you make without even thinking,
Oh, like what?
like walking
how?
to higher level stuff,
Give me an example.
like planning and decision making.
So are you saying these basal ganglia are kind of a big deal?
Definitely a big deal.
Okay.
Think about it. You're able to effortlessly type on your phone or ride a bike
Yeah.
because of these intricate networks working behind the scenes.
Wow.
Before we get into all that, let's start with the basics.
Hmm.
What exactly are the basal ganglia?
Yeah.
And where do they fit in the whole brain picture?
Okay, let's unpack this. Dr. Eldeeb's notes mention 5 key parts:
5.
the caudate nucleus,
Uh-huh.
putamen,
Yep.
lobus pallidus, subthalamic nucleus,
Okay.
and substantia nigra. It sounds like a whole other world in there.
It's more like a bustling city. With each of those parts, we call them nuclei,
Nuclei.
constantly communicating with each other and with other brain regions. These connections form what we call circuits.
Circuits.
And these circuits are where the magic happens.
Circuits. So this is where things start to sound a bit like an electronics class.
Kind of. Think of it this way. Each circuit is like a specialized team responsible for specific tasks.
Mm.
We've got the putamen circuit,
Okay.
which is like your autopilot for movement.
Mm-hmm.
It takes over when you do things you've done 1,000 times before,
Like what?
like tying your shoelaces or brushing your teeth,
Right.
freeing up your conscious mind for other things.
That's actually pretty amazing. It's like my brain has its own personal assistant for all the routine stuff.
Right.
What about the other the caudate circuit?
That's where things get really interesting. The caudate circuit is more like the strategic planner of your brain.
Strategic.
It helps you translate your thoughts and ideas into actions. Imagine you're deciding to make a cup of coffee.
Okay, I like coffee.
The caudate circuit helps you map out the steps from getting up and grabbing a mug to actually brewing the coffee. It even anticipates what might happen next, like making sure you don't spill hot coffee on yourself.
Okay, so if I mess up that last part and burn myself, that's not the caudate circuit's fault, right? But seriously, it's incredible to think about all this intricate planning happening in my brain without me even realizing it.
It is pretty remarkable. And these circuits are not just sending electrical signals, they're also communicating through a complex system of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters.
Brain chemicals. This is where I usually start to zone out, but I have a feeling you're going to make it way more interesting than my old textbooks did.
Let's try. Imagine a bustling marketplace with all these different vendors selling their wares.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That's kind of like the basal ganglia.
I
With neurotransmitters like dopamine, GABA, acetylcholine, and serotonin all playing their part, they're constantly interacting, sending signals, and making sure the whole system is in balance.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good visual.
Good.
So what happens if this marketplace or the balance of these neurotransmitters gets thrown off?
That's when we start seeing problems.
Problems like what?
And one of the most well-known examples of this is Parkinson's disease,
Okay.
which is linked to a shortage of dopamine in a specific part of the basal ganglia called the substantia nigra.
Parkinson's is something I've definitely heard of, but I don't really understand what's happening in the brain. Is it just that one part, the substantia nigra, that's causing all the issues?
Well, it's a bit more complex than that. Remember those intricate circuits we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
When dopamine levels drop, it's like cutting a crucial communication line. The signals get distorted and the whole system gets thrown off balance.
So even though it starts in one place, it ends up impacting the whole network.
Exactly. And that's why we see such a wide range of symptoms in Parkinson's disease, from the tremors and rigidity that most people are familiar with,
Oh,
to things like difficulty initiating movement, and even changes in facial expressions.
wow. I had no idea. It was so far-reaching. It makes me wonder about other problems that can happen in the basal ganglia.
Well, you're in luck, because Dr. Eldeeb's notes cover a whole range of other disorders that can affect the basal ganglia,
Really?
and they each have their own unique set of symptoms and challenges.
This is getting really interesting. Let's take a deeper dive into those other disorders after a quick break.
So we've talked about Parkinson's disease, where that vital dopamine supply dwindles.
Yeah.
What about when the signals in the basal ganglia
Yeah.
get crossed, leading to unwanted movements?
Unwanted movements.
That's where we get into conditions like chorea.
Chorea. It sounds familiar,
Yeah.
but I can't quite place it. What does that look like?
Picture this. Someone's trying to thread a needle,
Okay.
but their hand keeps jerking in these quick, unpredictable movements,
Huh.
almost like their body's dancing to a tune only they can hear.
Oh.
That's chorea, rapid involuntary movements that can affect various parts of the body.
So it's not just a tremor.
No,
It's like their movements have a mind of their own.
exactly. And Dr. Eldeeb's notes point to damage in the caudate nucleus as a major culprit. Remember,
The what?
that's the part of the basal ganglia involved in planning and coordinating movements. When it's damaged,
Yeah.
the smooth flow of signals gets disrupted, resulting in those jerky, involuntary movements.
It's like the conductor of the orchestra has suddenly started playing random notes. It makes you realize how much we take for granted.
Oh,
Our ability to move smoothly and intentionally. Are there other conditions where this delicate control goes awry?
absolutely.
Eh.
Dr. Eldeeb also talks about athetosis, which is characterized by slow, writhing movements,
Slow.
often in the hands and arms. Imagine someone trying to sculpt something out of clay,
Okay.
but their hands are twisting and turning involuntarily.
That sounds incredibly frustrating,
Yeah.
like your body is working against you.
What causes that kind of movement disorder?
Again, it goes back to damage in specific areas of the basal ganglia.
Going.
In this case, the lentiform nucleus, which includes the globus pallidus and putamen.
Right.
These structures play a crucial role in those feedback loops that fine-tune our movements. When they're damaged, the signals get scrambled,
Uh-huh.
resulting in those slow, writhing movements.
So we've got the quick, jerky movements of chorea
Right.
and the slower, writhing movements of athetosis.
Yes.
Is there a disorder that combines these two in some way?
Well, not quite a combination, but Dr. Eldeeb's notes do mention another condition called ballismus, and this one is even more dramatic. Imagine someone suddenly flinging their arm out with incredible force,
Whoa.
almost as if they're throwing a baseball, but without any intention of doing so.
Wow, that sounds intense
Yeah.
and potentially dangerous.
It can be.
What's going on in the brain to cause such violent movements?
This time, the damage is centered in the subthalamic nucleus, another key player in the basal ganglia circuitry. When this area is compromised,
It disrupts the braking mechanism that normally keeps our movements in check, leading to those powerful, uncontrolled flinging movements.
it's like the brakes have failed and the movements are going full speed ahead. It's mind-boggling how these tiny structures deep in our brain can have such a huge impact on our ability to move or not move in the way we want to.
It really highlights the importance of that intricate balance within the basal ganglia. When things are working smoothly, we hardly even notice them. But when something goes wrong, the consequences can be quite dramatic.
So we've got Parkinson's disease, chorea, athetosis, and ballismus,
Yeah.
all stemming from disruptions in the basal ganglia. It's starting to feel like a whole new vocabulary lesson.
Yeah.
But these aren't just medical terms. They represent real challenges faced by people every day.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that each of these conditions is more than just a collection of symptoms. They have a profound impact on people's lives, affecting their ability to work, socialize, and simply live their lives to the fullest.
It makes you appreciate the incredible complexity of the human brain and how much we still have to learn about it. But what about those higher level functions you mentioned earlier? The planning, decision-making, even motivation. How do the basal ganglia play a role in those?
That's one of the most fascinating areas of ongoing research. It seems the basal ganglia aren't just about movement execution. They're also involved in selecting which actions to take, evaluating potential outcomes, and even driving us towards rewards.
So it's like they're not just the conductor of the orchestra, they're also helping to choose the music.
Exactly. And this opens up a whole new dimension to our understanding of these structures. It suggests that dysfunction in the basal ganglia could contribute to a wider range of conditions than previously thought, including things like obsessive-compulsive disorder and addiction.
Wow, this is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about the brain.
It's a constant process of discovery and refinement. But one thing is clear. The basal ganglia are far more than just a group of nuclei tucked away deep in our brains. They're essential for movement, thought, and even our very sense of self.
It's incredible to think that these structures we've been talking about are playing such a profound role in shaping our lives. What are some of the exciting avenues of research that are currently exploring the mysteries of the basal ganglia?
Researchers are delving into how specific circuits within the basal ganglia contribute to different cognitive functions, how they interact with other brain regions, and how we can develop more targeted therapies to address the specific disruptions that lead to various disorders.
This is definitely a topic that deserves more attention and exploration. But before we get too carried away, I think we need a moment to pause and reflect on all the incredible information we've covered so far. Okay. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that these tiny structures deep in our brains are involved in so much more than just moving our arms and legs.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's one more fascinating concept from Dr. Eldeeb's notes
Oh,
that I think will really drive this point home.
okay.
Something called diffuse stimulation.
Diffuse stimulation. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
And maybe a little less intimidating than some of the other terms we've encountered today.
It's actually a pretty straightforward concept.
Okay.
Imagine a gentle rain falling over a vast landscape.
Okay.
That's kind of like diffuse stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
It's widespread, non-specific activation of the basal ganglia that actually has a calming effect on our muscles, reducing overall muscle tone.
So it's like a global chill-out signal for our muscles.
Exactly. And it's crucial for maintaining that delicate balance we've been talking about.
Right.
When the basal ganglia are functioning properly, this diffuse stimulation acts like a braking system, preventing our muscles from becoming too tense or rigid.
That makes so much sense, and it explains why we see increased muscle tone and rigidity in conditions like Parkinson's disease.
Right.
The loss of dopamine disrupts this diffuse stimulation, essentially taking the brakes off the motor system.
Precisely. It's like losing that gentle rain that keeps the landscape from drying out and becoming brittle.
Okay, that's a fantastic analogy. So we've gone from these tiny structures deep in our brains
Right?
to understanding why someone with Parkinson's might struggle to button a shirt.
Yeah.
It really highlights how even the smallest disruptions can have profound consequences, doesn't it?
It really does. And it underscores the importance of continued research into the basal ganglia and these related disorders. The more we understand about how these structures work, the better equipped we'll be to develop effective treatments and therapies that can improve people's lives.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
And I have to say, I'm leaving with a newfound appreciation for the complexity and the power of these often overlooked structures in our brains.
I agree. It's a reminder that there's so much more to discover about the brain,
Oh, yeah.
and that even the smallest parts can have a profound impact on who we are and how we experience the world.
So for our listeners, if you're feeling inspired to learn more about the basal ganglia and the incredible world of neuroscience, I encourage you to do some exploring on your own. There are countless resources available online, and in libraries you might even discover a passion for a field you never knew existed.
And remember, what we know today is just a glimpse into the vast landscape of the brain. There's always more to uncover, more connections to make, and more mysteries to unravel.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the basal ganglia. Until next time, keep exploring, Array.